It is vital on your spiritual path to balance the mystic with the mundane. There is so much importance in this that we don't realize it. Today, I want to dive into a couple of different things going on in the spiritual realms, in the spiritual world. I want to talk about this on a couple different levels. So I'm going to hit you with some pretty interesting concepts and things to think about today. But in the end, it's all going to come back to the same thing. The teaching that when you grab onto this teaching, you will go further, faster, and have deeper intuitive experiences than you ever have before. And that teaching is this: it is important to balance the mystic and the mundane. Let's get into this. This is one of those topics that isn't necessarily based in like spiritual tools. Do this, do that, it'll work. You'll have this happen, you'll have that happen. It's one of those more boring topics that I am so going to make not boring today. By the time we get done, you'll see what I mean. But it's one of those more general topics that we don't always see the value and the importance in it. But stick with me on this because we're going to go there. We're going to go there today. We're going to talk about some of the shifts in spirituality, some of the traps in spirituality that have been out there. I'm going to talk about the balance between the mystic and the mundane. We're going to touch on conspirituality. That's a new term out there. Well, I don't know how new it is. I remember hearing it and I thought, yeah, that's something. We're going to touch a little bit on spiritual psychosis. We're going to talk about being balanced, and we're going to talk about how to actually have experiences that are real, authentic, accurate, and mind-blowing, and a block that a lot of us don't pay attention to. Hopefully by the end of this session, I'll send you off thinking about it in such a way that it will start to open some doors for you intuitively. It'll start to give you the empowerment you need to have access to your channel directly. This will all make sense. But we're going to talk about spiritual psychosis on a personal level, on a reader's level, and on a teacher's level. I want to cover all three of those today because I think all three of those can be very, very helpful. In general, when I talk about balancing the mystic and the mundane, what I mean is exactly that. Sometimes we can fall too far into one direction, and it can be tough to get back into that middle point. And even worse, sometimes pop culture or perhaps a teacher or an influencer or something like that will really kind of pull you in to this concept of, well, you're going to be more intuitive if you go further down the mystic. Forget about the mundane. That's just a made up reality, and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we're going to talk about this a little bit in depth because there's little hints of truth in everything. But when you start to shut down and be harmed by it is when we take the little truths and make that the truth of everything. Everything. So balance is really the key here. And again, by the end of this podcast episode, I'm hoping that you'll be able to take all these ideas into consideration, find your own balance between the mystic and the mundane, and open intuitive doors that you're like, wow, did not know this was possible, but now I see the power in the balance, the actual true power in the balance. Okay, let's talk about this on a personal level first, because it's kind of the easiest one to talk about. The reader's level, and especially the teacher's level, gets a little bit more, intense in discussion, but we're going to build up to it. On a personal level, I have seen a lot of extremes happen, especially over the last 10 years, where there are pipelines forming. And pipeline being somebody decides they're going to start meditating, and then, which is wonderful, and then they're going to start doing more self-healing and self-help, and they're going to really care for themselves more, and they're going to meditate, and then they're going to try some intuitive practices. And then they happen to get invited into going further and further and further and further and disconnecting from their own source, from their own, really kind of isolating them from the things that make them who they are here. And this pipeline, pipeline to conspirituality, right? Next thing you know, there's going to be titles of some teacher or somebody will say, hey, you're probably this. And then the title will come on. This happens on a personal level when what we have to deal with in our human life is painful and can be difficult, or there's something in our human life that we want to get away from or escape from. We can get invited into sort of losing ourselves down a spiritual path and completely neglecting the human path. Is there any judgment in this? No. Honestly, on some level, anyone that's walked a spiritual path has had a day like this. And if a teacher or a friend or anyone else that's been on a spiritual path for a long time, if you were to question them and they were honest with you, yeah, there was some point where they got swept up in something and there was a lesson in the process of being swept up in it. What we don't want is we don't want to get swept up into a spiritual concept, spiritual path, or a spiritual approach and get so lost in it that we start believing things that are simply told to us, and we believe them because they were told to us. That is a sort of a level of spiritual psychosis where we get so swooped up into something that our value becomes part of that. That's how we value ourselves, and we see ourselves as special if we're super intuitive or super far down this path, or we're a level 32 in this one type of category of, spiritual training of some sort. We can still, and here's the kicker, this is why this is kind of a fluid conversation. You can be a level 32 on a specific spiritual path, absolutely. But if you forget that you're a mom and a friend and an aunt and, and that you got to pay your electric bill, and then those things all fall into this like bad viewpoint of a toxic matrix that you're stuck in, you've already lost your spiritual connection. Spiritual connection is found in the balance between the human and the intuitive. When we completely let go of our human experience and we slide into, that's kind of the best way of saying it because it's gradual. You sort of gradually slide into it, just like any other pipeline conspiracy type of thing that's out there. They never start big. They never, pick any cult out there. And just start there. It always starts small, and then you start building and building and building. And we might start feeling better on our spiritual path because we got a sign from a bird. A bird swooped down right in the moment where we were feeling fearful of something, and then we took a deep breath and we reminded ourselves, okay, it's going to be okay. That bird swooped down right in front of me. It made me feel safe. It made me feel okay. That is a spiritual path. It's when we then are so desperate and in need of that comfort, which is actually why we need more community in this world. Loving community, unconditional loving community, right? Not influential, but loving. That we need more of that comfort. So then the next bird is a sign, and the next bird is a sign, and then every single bird we see is a sign. Now, some people might have their communication come through with just birds. That's how they connect to Mother Earth. And so that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when every bird, every squirrel, every groundhog, every leaf blowing in the wind is a sign. That's when we know that we are comforting ourselves. We are self-soothing in the spiritual world. And I say this with so much love. And again, almost all of us have had moments like this. But that's a vulnerable place to be. That's a vulnerable place to be, which leads me, let's talk about the teacher level next, and then I'll talk about the reader's level, because the reader level, especially if you're learning how to do readings or you've been doing readings, there's going to be some really helpful information in this. But let's talk about the teacher level next, because this is where it comes from. This is the source. We don't just naturally on our own with absolutely no living person's input go down a road, a pipeline, a wellness pipeline or a spiritual pipeline that goes so far down a rabbit hole that we think everything in our human life is bad or we get lost in it. It always comes from a living teacher. So let's talk about this. There are two types of teachers. There is a teacher that is going to give you the tools that you need at the time and is going to emphasize the value of you having a direct connection to your own intuitive channel, you having a direct connection to your own source, to your own guides, to your own higher self. They are going to emphasize that you trust you. They are also not going to let you off the hook when it comes to being human, right? The other type of teacher is the one that's going to say this is all a construct, none of it is real, you can forget about all of that, all you have to do is blink 3 times, move your hands this way, and light this special candle for $700, and you're going to be fixed. That was a little bit of a joke, but not completely a joke, because there are readers out there that are scammers doing the candle thing. But with that said, when we are feeling, and I want to give you solutions. I don't ever want to just jump on here on these podcasts with you and be like, oh, this is a tough thing out there. I want to give you ways of seeing it, ways of thinking about it, ways of identifying it for yourself and for the others that you love. And then I also want to give you tools on, how to balance all this, right? We're going to talk about the 3 bodies. I'm actually saying it out loud so I remember the tools that I want to give you around it. But all of these pipelines to conspirituality or pipelines to spiritual psychosis or absolute disconnect from the humanity that you're in and the human life you're in, all of these things happen to, listen very carefully to this one, all of these things happen to highly intelligent people, highly compassionate people, and highly empathic people. When we are, especially when we are struggling emotionally with something, we can be invited into quick or easy or ultimate ways to solve that avoids confrontation or avoids the difficult healing process. And that is so delicious. I'm not going to lie. It really is. It really is. There's going to be a rare person that can be like, no, I want to go to therapy and feel all the pain. All the rest of us are going to be like cracking open a beer, slamming down a chocolate bar, and I'm just going to meditate because it feels better. So what I'm talking about today is very normal, ridiculously normal. It is a completely normal part of being human, but the power lies in being able to catch it, right? If we compared this to something that we did physically, right? Like if we compared this to, let's say that you love to be barefoot and that was your groove. I do. I can relate to this. And let's say you lived in a southern region that was 70 degrees year round. So you could be barefoot every single day. Maybe it rained once and your feet got a little wet. Oh, well, they're still warm. And then you packed everything up and you moved up to a northern location where it's like negative 10 degrees. And for our worldly listeners, that's that Fahrenheit thing of ours, but it is super cold, right? But you kept being barefoot. And someone's like, you have to put on shoes. And you're like, you don't understand. The act of putting on shoes is really uncomfortable. And I don't want to face that I have to put on shoes. And you keep walking around. And then your feet get numb. And you don't even realize your feet are numb until the pain really starts setting in. So we go all the way down sometimes these spiritual pipelines to soothe and to help ourselves cope. This is so natural. But the sooner we can catch ourselves doing it, the sooner we can pull ourselves back into balance where our actual power lies. Because once you go that far down spiritual pipelines, they become non-spiritual and you lose your power. You might feel like you're gaining power, but you're actually losing power. And so to wrap up the personal piece before we go into the teacher piece here, which is the direction I want to head, the personal piece looks like this. If 50% or more of your day is residing in the spiritual realms, right? And that's not your job. Let's put it that way. Like if you're a reader, yes, that's going to happen. But if you're an accountant or you work at a restaurant and yet the majority of your day is still spent in meditation states or channeled symbols or things like this, then the balance is off. The balance is off. Then it might be a good time to sit down and say, hey, I think I might be having a little bit of escapism thing happening here. I think I might be self-soothing with spiritual type tools, and just catching that and getting back into center and doing things that are more human, right? Go to the park, go to the pond, feed a duck. It's that simple, right? The duck doesn't have to talk to you. You can have a moment with a duck where it's just a quack and you're like, this is an awesome moment, right? Look up at the clouds and find shapes in the clouds, not shapes in the clouds that tell you a sign or tell you an intuitive message, just simply a funny shape in a cloud, right? We have to balance both of these. When it comes to a spiritual vibration, I'm going to put it this way. The highest spiritual vibration is found in the center point between our spiritual self and our human self. When we go too far down that spiritual road of the spiritual practices, the spiritual labels, the spiritual, here's another sign down there. And this is the teaching part too, but that one way is the only way. I'm this type of a being, and other beings are not as like spectacular as these types of beings. And any sort of positioning that you hear, that's too far tipped down one spiritual, pipeline. If we go too far into the human, we get so disconnected of us being spiritual beings that sometimes our human life can get really bumpy and we can feel very isolated. Your strongest point is right in between the two, right balanced into that middle. We can have days where we're a little more human. We can have days where maybe we go to like a retreat a spiritual retreat for 3 days. Absolutely. Go. Have a fantastic 3 days. But when you get back, do the dishes, right? Make that phone call to your cousin. So we need to make sure that we stay balanced in the middle, because if we go too far either way, your vibration drops. Temporary drops in vibration, no big deal, right? You have a very human day or a very human week, sometimes even a human month. Absolutely. You go on a retreat or you take a course or you try on a new meditation technique. Absolutely. You're going to tip a little bit the other way and then you're going to come back. But the second we let go of one of those completely and do our best to not have to be in either the human or the spiritual, that's where the balance fades, and that's where your intuition will shut down. That's where your vibration will lower, and that's where you will be out of alignment. Now, again, like I said a little earlier, this typically happens as a result of a living person somewhere. First off, it's usually a living person that got us all twisted up and spiraling into pain. So usually emotional pain comes from something another living person in our life has done. So in sort of a symbolic metaphor, it's almost like you have a painful experience with someone or an event or something that happened, because a big event can also cause you a lot of emotional pain. And it pushes you on this scale all the way past that middle point toward that spiritual side, sometimes so far that we use that as a way to feel better. Now, knowing this or not knowing this, some teachers out there will take advantage of that. I wish they didn't. I wish I could just like wave a magic wand and be like, stop it. Be supportive. Like I was saying, there are going to be teachers that have a positive influence. They promote you to promote yourself. They push you to set healthy boundaries, to make yourself a priority, to find your direct connection, to see the amazingness within you that is organic, that is not labeled, it's not categorized, it's not better than another one, it's not worse than another one. It's just amazing. And there are a lot of teachers out there doing that, right? But there's also a lot of teachers out there who will take a vulnerability or a person who's in a vulnerable state and will pull it into a state of codependency, right? Especially somebody who's empathic, super compassionate, or even highly intelligent, because some of these pathways to this spiritual psychosis or conspirituality is a pathway of either super feel good, meditate into this certain energetic point, or none of this human stuff is real. So all the stuff that is hurting you doesn't even exist anyway. So join me over here in this mystical world 24/7. Or they will approach a very highly intelligent person with very solid structures, in spiritual terms, right? They will have labels of particular beings that exist that are the highest vibration of all the high. You've never seen a vibration that high. This is the highest vibration. And they will create sort of an intellectual structure that, that they say is actual, real, labeled. This is what it is. Everything else isn't there, right? And so having that structure can be very delicious, especially to an very highly intelligent person. And they can be like, okay, this is a form that I can approach. The previous teachers that I was talking about that encourage you and cheerlead you, the lighthouse teachers that gets your ship from A to B and says, go sail along and have an incredible life. The teachers that don't need you to follow them, don't need you to be underneath them. The teachers that don't need you to, just pay them for being incredible, right? Those types of teachers. They will also teach you things, and many times teachers teach in concepts and forms, but it's an unlimited version of teaching of concept and form. And I always, if I run across somebody who's very highly intelligent and they like structure and they like things, how do things work? I tell them, you can learn through ideas and concepts and forms, but then know that each and every idea, concept, and form is unlimited. There's no positioning. There's no higher or lower. It all just is. So you can find a channeler, for example, who very positively will channel uplifting information from a higher source, and it's coming from a pure source, because they're not asking anything of you. They're just helping you understand that everything is possible and there are no limitations. And here's what you can do to connect to yourself more deeply. Then there are other channelers that say, this is going to happen on this date. Oh, don't even get me started on how many times I've seen the world's going to end. Yep. Okay. So, and oh, it did end. It ended. It just skipped and flipped into a different flippity of a different timeline. Okay. That's cool too. But when you have someone that's channeling someone that comes through and says, this is this, and there's no other way, and this is the highest, and this is the lowest, and this is the structure that exists, and it gets really pinpointed in such a way that it invites codependency. And codependency is triggered, and so many of us have experienced it. I was raised to be codependent, so I'm speaking from experience here. I'm grateful that I was able to work through that and heal that. But as somebody who's experienced codependency, it's nothing bad. It happens. But they trigger it by inviting you into the safety and security of feeling like things are set in stone, that there's something you can rely on, that 1 + 1 is 2, this is exactly how it is, everything else is wrong. So if I'm with the thing that's right and everyone else is with the thing that's wrong, then I'm okay. That's sort of how codependency, in a nutshell, works in a spiritual and energetic environment. Now, that's the personal and the teaching level of this, right? These are the uh-ohs that can happen when we get out of that balance. When it comes to working with readers, right? Let's say you go to a reader, not so much energy workers, but readers that deliver information. The same is going to be true in that if the information that comes through from a reader is life choices that are so directed and so spot on and so intimidating and or scary to do. For example, if a reader says you have to leave your spouse, That's tough, right? That is one that doesn't stay in a moment of balance. When it comes to messages that come through that are in balance, it would be, hey, identify this, this, and this happening with your spouse. Pay attention to this and pay attention to this, and figure out how that aligns with you. A reader can absolutely accurately pinpoint that perhaps your spouse is not being kind. Absolutely. But it's when you come across a reader that says you have to quit your job, you have to move to this exact town, you have to get a job with this person, and you have to give me $400 for this candle to burn because you're cursed. These are the readers that we want to be leery of, right? These are the readers that have gone so far down that spiritual path, that pipeline, that it's no longer about simply delivering what's coming through in a balanced state, and it's now more about delivering their opinion. I will say this about readers. Most readers that I've come across who let their opinion bleed into their readings are not doing it in a bad way or out of spite. And they just need a little bit more time to train themselves to know the distinct feeling between imagination and intuition, that distinct feeling between intuition, which is just about the person they're reading, has nothing to do with them, and imagination and opinion, which is how they feel about the person that they're reading situation. So it is a delicate balance. It's why you should always get a reader. You should always get a recommendation for a reader. It's why you should always keep training your own intuition so you can start to get intuitive messages for yourself and guidance. But a balanced reader is going to take into consideration your human path and your spiritual path. And intuitive information that comes through is not going to come through in a form that looks like it's controlling, or a form that looks like it's demanding, or a form that looks like it's scary. That's very human. All of those are very human. There is no need to get you to do anything from your guides or your loved ones. They simply want you to pay attention to what you're supposed to pay attention to on your path. You are strong, you are capable, and even if you're in a vulnerable spot and struggling, an intuitive message coming through is simply going to help guide you on what to pay attention to, right? I recall, and I'll give you an example, a concrete example. I recall a young man coming to me, and I've talked about this in the podcast before, I'm sure. So my apologies for doubling up on a story here. But a young man came to me and said that they went to a reader who read and got all of her information from angels, and her information was the highest and most accurate information because it came from angels, and everyone else that did readings, their information was not as accurate as hers because she was getting messages from the highest source and from the best source. And so anyone that talked to the dead or loved ones on the other side is a better way of saying that, wasn't getting as important of information as her. So this was how the meeting started with this young man who came to me for a reading, by the way. And this is the first thing he said to me, followed up with, so how do you read? Like, I read from the dead, the loved ones on the other side. He goes, oh, okay, well then, you can tell me what you're going to tell me. But what I heard from her was probably more accurate. So this is how the whole thing started, which was a tough way to start as a reader. But this was a young man. I'm older, kind of mom-like type. And I was like, okay, kiddo, that's okay. Let me just see what comes through, right? And they talked about he was going to school, how, there was a wonderful vibration, stay in school. This is a good thing for you. You've got some changes to navigate on your approach with school. And he interrupted and said, because they were sharing, yeah, school should be your focus right now. This is wonderful. This is helping you in this way, in this way, in this way. And he said, yes, I'm in college, so you confirm that. He said, but I've already quit my previous school because the past reader told me I wasn't supposed to go to that school, I was supposed to go to a different one. Now, when I asked him more details around this, the reader not only told him to quit the college he was in, but told him to apply for a college that he probably wasn't going to get into, and that he had to quit first and then apply to that college, and that he would get in. And she gave him the exact college to apply to. And he was in that process. And I said, so wait, you quit school? And he goes, yeah, I quit school and I just sent my application into, it was like Boston University or something. And his guides were standing there just sort of shaking their head. And that's when my heart sank. And I knew he wasn't going to get into the other school. And so I was like, well, let's talk about all the possibilities that could happen, right? So can you get back into the other school if you don't get into this one? He goes, no, I'm getting into that one. The reader told me I was. So he made this life choice. By the way, he didn't get into the school, which was really sad. I don't know what he did after that because it was a reading and he went on his way. But the best I could do as a reader at that point is just talk about what to pay attention to and what to approach in each circumstance that could come up. But he didn't even want to hear the circumstance. He was like, no, it's going to be. And if you say it, then it won't. Like there was so much of the spiritual jargon coming at me from angels and manifesting and everything that reality was gone. Reality was gone. It is, and this is where I'm going to wrap up and get back to my first point. We have to balance the mystic and the mundane. To go too far down the spiritual path, and there is such a thing, is to ignore the fact that you're in a human body. And the, admin at the college is in a human body. And they don't change their mind because you decided affirmationally they're going to. We are in an experience where there are many souls who have variations of different levels of free will. And just because we want it to be so doesn't mean it is, right? Think about that like hot, sexy movie star. And there isn't 7 million people married to them, all because you can't just say, I'm going to marry this person, and then it happens. We are in a human reality, and to disconnect from the what sometimes we feel is either painful or mundane, and to fall into a lulled, calming sense of security super far down a spiritual path of beliefs that go so far they turn into false beliefs can be detrimental to our path. We can be sitting there in between colleges hoping that the previous school will take us back. So the end message here, and talking about the 3 bodies, I said I would give you kind of a way to move forward with this and a solid positive end message on this. Couple things in summary. Everyone has moments like this. If you're listening to this podcast and you're like, I feel kind of ashamed to say that I think I did that. I think I was following that one teacher or listening to that one thing, and I really got swept up in it and I neglected this other stuff and it didn't do me well. Do not feel an ounce of shame, an ounce of guilt, or an ounce of self-judgment for that. It's part of the path. And guess who is stronger now because you've been through that, you've come out the other side, you woke back up and went, got it. I am back and centered, aligned, and in my highest vibration again. And you are aware of being in that highest vibration because you did go down that path. So there's no judgment on this path. The next thing that I will say is being able to stay in a state of balance is keeping in mind more often than not that you are a human. Yes, we are a spiritual being having a human experience, but we're not a spiritual being having a spiritual experience. We're a spiritual being having a human experience, right? This is the kind of the concept I'm going to leave you with to move forward and stay balanced and stay in your strongest point of intuition and spirituality, which is right in the middle of the human and the intuitive. Your physical body is like a car. You might have heard this analogy before. Your human body, physical body that you're walking around here is like a car, a vehicle. And you, the spirit, are driving that car, right? If a guru tells you you could drive that car straight through a brick wall, and if you believe hard enough, the brick wall will magically disappear, it's going to be a bad day. It's going to be a bad day. And being in that balanced state is being able to look at that guru and say, that does not make sense in a human, physical, molecule-based, solid experience. Next lesson, please. So we are spirit driving a car. Yeah, you can get out of the car. You can remote view. You can astral travel. You can do all these super cool things. But at the end of the day, you got to get back in the car, right? Because you kind of want to live. So the car is life, and you're driving the car, and you still got to drive the car to the parking lot. You still got to park it in the spot, hopefully back it in to make tomorrow an easier day so you can just pull right on out. But you have to take care of that vehicle, and you have to be aware of the vehicle's limitations, and you have to maintain that vehicle. That is the agreement you came down here to do. And to be able to be focused equally on the care of that vehicle and the care of your spirit, that is where synchronicities fall in front of you. Intuition opens wide, and life just becomes so wonderful, because that's where your intuition tells you where you can drive, where the brick wall did fall down, and you can drive right through it. Put it that way. Stay balanced, and know that it's very normal to fall into the human realms, feel a little disconnected from our intuition. It's also very normal to fall pretty far into the spiritual realms for a while. Just remember to come on back. Find that balanced radio dial right in the middle of the radio where you're tuned in, you're vibrating high, and your intuition is strong.